Well, just before COP, we're still waiting on some editorial changes to be made, but right before COP starts.
Yeah, very good.
Good morning, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you? Looks like. Thank you very much. That's what happened when you also connected on LinkedIn Live. So Dosuma, Mark, thank you very much again for joining. So we are gonna wait for the two other panelists and look forward to starting on time.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
Afternoon and good morning. This is Maggie from Africa Catalyst.
How are you, Maggie?
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
I
us?
can.
How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thanks for joining in. We're having our moderator joining us shortly, and then he will introduce himself before we kick off. It's really great to have you all join us today. We're really excited.
Maggie, you will allow me to say just congratulations, and I'll call you afterwards. Okay.
Thank you, Dauda. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi everyone,
So look,
this is Abdul Salam. Good morning all, good afternoon.
hey, good afternoon, Abdul Salam. How are you? Can you hear me, Abdul Salam? Oh, guys, I see the name of Doksuma on Abdul Salam's screen.
How come?
Oh, I can see that too.
Abdul Salam, what's name is appearing on your screen? I see Dr. Alhamdu Doksuma.
Very strange. I also see that. So what is the name that appears under my picture? Let me show my
Yep.
picture then.
All right, perfect.
So
No, you have the correct name. It's just Abdul Salam who has your name. I don't know why. Abdul Salam, can you hear us? You're on mute. You're on mute.
maybe he used my link.
Yeah, he likes it so. Okay, maybe you use a different link. So maybe you need to. I don't know whether it's the producer or you. We need to fix that.
We will take a look at that now. It's great to
Okay.
have you, Absalam. Sorry about that. We'll check it out technically.
No, maybe he likes so much the name of Dosuma that he just wanted to switch it to his, right?
You know, I'm twin, so I don't have problem having somebody else having my name.
So today the Abdul Salam will be your twin then.
Exactly.
So I think we have only Catherine left. I don't know if she's connected yet. Let me check with her.
We have the moderator who has just joined us now. I think he will make an introduction, Dr. Arnold Segara. Arnold, I see you have Abdul Salam's name. We will check that as well.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Apologies. Arnold, let me introduce you to the panelists. You can just do a brief chat before we start, and then after the chat, we'll play a promo video as you get used a little bit, and we have other panelists joining as well. So we're just going to leave it to you for a few minutes as we check on other panelists and check the names too.
Sure thing, sure thing. Gentlemen, ladies, really is really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Maggie, for the opportunity. Again, it really is a pleasure, Mr. Dauda, and the entire team. The entire team. I don't want to mention anyone by name. It's just an opportunity to actually talk about something of this magnitude with all of you. So I really just can't overemphasize what this actually means for the entire continent. Again, apologies for joining so late. I changed ISPs just the other day, so my sincere apologies. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Arnold. We are very happy to have you moderate this discussion, and thanks for accepting to do that. So we look forward to the discussion. So I think we should be about to start in about 1 minute or so.
Yeah, I think we're going to check if Catherine has joined in, because we want to have her as well. For some of us gender people that are so passionate about this conversation would love to see a lot of female faces on the screen, and we have to make sure she's joining in. So in the meantime, we're going to play a promo video just to give us a quick background of the entire event, just a little bit, maybe for 2 minutes, and then and check on her and see if she has the correct link, and then change the names, and then Arnold will be back to kick off the session. We're excited and looking forward to all of this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Maggie. So when we start, I guess it doesn't matter that we see on Zoom right now the name of Abdul Salam with Arnold and Alhamdulillah with. I hope the producer can fix that, right?
Yes, we are fixing that, and we have a lot of participants that have joined in as well. We're really excited. So we see the numbers are growing, and I know that we should be starting now, but we'll be late by at least 2 minutes. But we have a video to set the stage for us as we begin. I think, technical, if you can help us put it up. We'll be back shortly.
And please note that also this is being broadcast, this is being live streamed on LinkedIn and also on our website. So we are excited that people can join us either by Zoom or directly on the website, or even LinkedIn, which has already started. Thank you very much again.
Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon. Can anybody good morning? Can anybody?
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We really do apologize for joining you a little later than expected. We had a few technical difficulties, but finally made it. Could you kindly mute if you are just joining us? Just a little ground rule, and of course. If I could kindly just hand over to one of our session organizers for just a few ground rules. Maggie, if it is possible for you to just set a few ground rules and some house rules, just kindly, of course, if you could.
Le plus gentiment possible.
Hi, everyone. My apologies. I think we will.
Hello. Hello, everyone. This is Ring, one of your interpreters. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, we're trying to get you on the other side. Could you allow us to do that?
Please. Let everybody know that once you do that, you can no longer hear us on the floor, please. They will need to switch to the channel to hear the interpretation.
Okay. I think I'll give some ground rules, Arnold. We would like to ask our panelists to please switch on their videos as they're being introduced. But also, I think as we know how Zooms go or webinars, sometimes video turn on or turn off when you're unaware. So if you could just kindly unmute or mute. If you're not speaking, you can kindly mute. And if you are speaking, you can kindly unmute. But the moderator will be calling you on to do all of this. If you're speaking, he'll be giving you the platform to unmute yourself, and then when you're done, kindly please mute yourself. We also have translations to French. As mentioned earlier, if you speak a specific language, kindly turn to the French, to the English language to be able to listen into your preferred language of choice. I think with all of that, I would like to hand back to Arnold. We have later on a Q&A. We available on our machines to answer your questions and pass them on to the speakers and panelists, but also our social media pages are open. If you can send them directly, we'll be addressing them to the speakers and to the moderator to share them with the speakers. Where the event is live on AfricaAtList, LinkedIn, Facebook, and also the website www.africaatlist.com. Kindly use the link, but it will ask you to register, but we're so excited to have all of you. And with all of that, I don't want to eat into other time, so I'll hand over back to you, Arnold. Thank you.
Je vous donne la parole, Arnold.
Thank you very, very much for that.
Merci beaucoup.
It is really much appreciated
Vraiment, nous l'avons beaucoup.
we find ourselves in this particular position, talking about this very, very pertinent conversation around energy on the continent, let alone just methane, and finding ways to actually finance methane on the continent. So it is a very, very pertinent conversation, one that doesn't really have to be overemphasized because it is that pertinent. So ladies and gentlemen, again, greetings to everyone. Our sincerest apologies for starting this late. Greetings to all of you all. Thank you for joining us for this episode on climate financing. But with this particular focus on the report actually launched by the Africa Catalyst in September this year, termed Debt for Climate Swaps, with this particular interesting focus, which provides a significant pathway to unlocking climate finance on the continent. So on this particular conversation, we want to delve even deeper and just try to analyze this particular subject by building on to the findings of this report, by exploring the opportunities and challenges, of course, because you cannot have opportunities without challenges that could actually derail the implementation. But before we actually delve into that, I mean, there's some particular statistics that are always bounced around when it comes to the energy deficit on the continent. You know, how many people are not having a light bulb on the continent. You know, last I checked, I think it was over 300 million. So if solutions like these are actually brought to the table, they could actually complement what is already existing, you know. And without any further ado, I would love to kindly hand over to one of our dear hosts at Africa Catalyst, Mr. Dauda. Could you just please, just very, very kindly, just maybe give us a few words, Mr. Dauda Sembere. He's a very, very interesting gentleman, and of course, is in the middle of, is in the thick of things, especially when it comes to many of these reports. If he could kindly give us a word or two before we get underway with our dear conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Arnold. I'm delighted to make a very short welcoming remark. Just for starting by welcoming everyone. We have an audience right now on Zoom and also on our social media accounts and the website watching this very important and very timely event on how to finance methane action in Africa. I think this is an issue that is extremely relevant. As you know, and as you follow, looking at the video that was just aired, methane is a leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So I think there is strong evidence that if we do have ambitious methane abatement objectives in Africa, certainly we will be able to make the continent meets its commitment under the Paris Accord. So I think this is very much important that we discuss these issues. But certainly when you do deal with these issues, you're facing a number of challenges, and I will certainly quote two of them. First of all, is the limited awareness and the debate on methane abatement in Africa. This is a fact that this is an issue that is, of course, well discussed, but not enough mainstream in the continent. Another challenge that we also face, and it's a critical one, is how to finance methane abatement efforts across the continent. And this is the reason why we have today assembled a distinguished panels to discuss about this issue. And of course, our panelists need no introduction, and I will let Dr. Sagawa, who is moderating this discussion, introduce them as he invites them on the stage. And I certainly just want to thank you, and thank you, the panelists, for accepting AfriCatalyst invitation to join this panel. We are very much looking forward to listening to them and to listening to their insight. I also want to thank, of course, Dr. Segawa, the moderator, for also accepting to moderate this discussion. And I am certainly also grateful to our partners who made this happen. And I certainly am thinking about the Global Methane Hub, who AfriCatalyst is partnering with in discussing these issues and making sure that we do have the necessary evidence and to make sure that we understand better this issue when it comes to Africa. So we are very much thankful and grateful to our partner, and also to other partners, extended partners that we work with on when it comes to climate finance issue. So without any further ado, I also want to thank all the audience that is joining us today from Zoom, but also from social media accounts of AfriCatalyst and our website. And certainly, I also would like to make an announcement. I think Dr. Segawa talked about the research that AfriCatalyst has been doing. We will be issuing a paper on how African countries can finance methane action. And that paper should be out by COP28 in Dubai. So we look forward to sharing it with you through our newsletter, through our email list when the time comes. So without any further ado, I'm going to leave the floor to the panelists who we invited to give us their insight based on their very strong expertise and experience on that. And thank you very much again, and we look forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Arnold.
Just before you go, just a quick one. How essential is it for AfriCatalyst to actually make sure that the financing of methane on the continent is achieved in the shortest possible time? Just before you leave. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, thank you, Arnold. I think actually the first way we can do that is by convening this type of event. And we certainly are not going to be standing in the way of the panelists who knows better than us. And we certainly want to look forward to hearing from them about how best African countries can address this challenge and how they can mobilize the necessary financing. So that's one that's one way to do so that AfriCatalyst is doing, is by convening this type of event to raise awareness and to mainstream this debate across Africa. A second way we can also help is by also doing very high level and sort of state-of-the-art research, as I indicated. And I believe, please stay tuned. We will be coming up in the next few days with a very comprehensive report on how to finance methane action in Africa. But for today, we don't want to take the stage. We want to listen to our distinguished panelists, and I look forward to you discussing with them, and of course, after with the audience. Thank you very much.
Sure. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Without any further ado, I guess I might as well hand this over or start our conversation with our dear panelists, as Mr. Sambene has actually highlighted. It's not about us, it's about the panelists and what they actually bring to the table. On the panel today, we have Dr. Amadou Dorsoma, who is currently serving as Division Manager for the Climate and Green Growth Development at the Africa Development Bank Group. He also holds a lot of positions, acting Director of Climate Change and Green Department within the same organization in that particular capacity. Very, very thank you for joining us for this conversation, Doctor. I know your bio, well, everyone on this particular panel, your bios are very, very long. If we spent a good, if we actually spent a good minute or two reading those, it might take us a good 30 minutes. We do have Abdul Salam Bello, who is the Executive Director of Africa Group at the World Bank. That is, of course, the board of directors. He previously served as an alternative executive director for Africa. This is, of course, from 2020 of November to October of 2022. He's also been around. His journey includes senior project officer at the United Nations Convention to combat desertification on the continent. He was focusing more on the Sahel region. Thank you very, very much for joining us too, Mr. Bello. We have Ms. Catherine Stodulka, who is the Director of Blended Finance Task Force at System IQ, a global coalition dedicated to mobilizing capital for climate action and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We need to remember that System IQ, of course, is a system change investment and advocacy firm. She leads the practice on financing natural solutions and facilitates connections between investors and impactful initiatives in emerging markets. Thank you very much for joining us, ma'am. And last but not least, we have Dr. Mark Jonathan Davis. Of course, Dr. Mark Jonathan Davis is Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Capterio, bringing nearly 25 years of strategic and operational leadership in energies, renewables, mining, and oil and gas sectors. He's really been in the sector for quite a while. Like I said, I could read all your bios combined for a good 45 minutes, but I figured I'll just give just the snippets, and then we get on with the conversation for all intents and purposes. And again, thank you all for joining us. If we're to start this particular conversation on methane, I'm very perplexed by where we actually start. Maybe we could start with you, Catherine, just for all intents and purposes. How would you begin to explain methane to a layman? Because I think everything needs to start at the beginning, and from there, then you move that forward towards the policy aspect of things and move forward.
Well, thank you so much. And what a privilege to be with an incredible panel today, and also with Africa Catalyst. You convene conversations in a way that is tangible and also in a way which is relevant to the challenges that are being faced. And so I will do two things. The first thing I will do is actually say it starts even before methane, and just lay out a couple of the financing challenges when we are looking at the perception of risk and the barriers to mobilizing capital into this asset class or into this sector. And then I think it would be wonderful to turn to my dear friend and colleague, Mark, because he will be able to make this very real. You know, what are the challenges to tackle or to drive methane action in Africa, and really look at the real economy challenges. But I will take us even a step further back and just lay out a framework which creates barriers, but also opportunities to unlock the finance, not just for methane action, but for the continent generally. The first is to say that this esteemed group of panelists and participants will hear the complaint all the time that there is no pipeline. There is no pipeline of investable projects in Africa or other emerging markets and developing regions. And that is fundamentally, as we all know on this group, untrue. It is fundamentally a challenge around how we package different investment opportunities and projects, and how we create the clarity for investors, particularly international investors who are chasing transition-aligned opportunities, but are unfamiliar with geographies. And so it is worth us saying a complaint that we will all hear so often is, there's plenty of money, but there's no projects. And I think it would be brilliant when we hear from, of course, Mark, you know, he'll put us straight on that. And he'll say there's actually a huge pipeline of opportunities where we could deploy capital to tackle these issues. That leads us to the second financing challenge, and it is particular to the African continent, where I've been fortunate to spend a lot of my time, although I'm dialing in from London. So hello to friends who I can't see you in the chat, but it's wonderful if particularly colleagues from Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, Namibia, Ghana, and Tanzania are on the line. We've had many of these discussions before, but that the challenge is perception of risk. And I will take a big pause there because I am using the language of perception. We are so often seeing an investment barrier because institutional investors, banks, private equity, it is, regardless of what financial institution you are coming from, a major challenge that the perception of risk associated with investing in the African continent. And I use that aggregated term because very few people are able to disaggregate and talk specifically about countries and priorities, and we need to change that. But that perception of risk does two things. First, it increases the cost of capital. We are here having a conversation about financing critical transition activities, and yet when the perception of risk is high, it means that money is more expensive. And when we have a global macro environment, which is seeing high interest rates anyway, you no longer have this demand, especially from institutionals, to invest in emerging markets to achieve yield. And that is a real, we are facing an unprecedented, challenging macro environment. If you combine that with this perception of risk, you have expensive money, which makes it harder to deploy, harder to raise capital for some of these critical transition opportunities. So you've got a pipeline issue, which I'm sure Mark will debunk. You've got a cost of capital perception of risk issue. And then the third issue that we have to unlocking capital for methane action in Africa is actually a whole set of financial system inefficiencies and biases. Some of those are linked to rating agencies, for example, who wait, and I can see many people laughing here. And I'm sure we talk about the rating challenge all the time, but this bias, which does not allow rating agencies to effectively identify, investment grade or sort of appropriately reflect the risk of individual assets, creates, again, a further challenge to unlock capital. Some of those financial system barriers which prevent investment into methane action in Africa are also linked to things like capital adequacy weighting, you know, the rules and regulations which exist in developed economies and make it harder or create disincentives to deploying capital into infrastructure. And then the third thing on this sort of financial system architecture point is that we collectively do not have the transition finance label right. That matters so much for this conversation, as we all know, because a lot of the investments needed to address methane action will require capital deployment into fossil fuel projects, into carbon intensive agriculture activities. And again, I'm sure Mark will speak to this, but it is a very difficult conversation to have with an investor who's committed to net zero. They've publicly said they are the green guys. And yet to have a conversation which says one of the greenest things you can do is reduce gas flaring, is to tackle these methane issues, when they've now faced with commitments to green finance and a lack of clarity on transition, that is where this conversation ends up falling over. So we need to define the pipeline in a way that investors will feel is accessible to them, and that requires scale, and that requires certain activities around bankability. We need to tackle the perception of risk, especially leveraging the regulation and the rules and the commitments, especially around the methane action. But we need to fundamentally reduce the cost of capital for these projects. But most importantly, we need to sort out transition finance, because if I am talking to investors about the most impactful thing they can do for climate action, and they are not allowed to look at methane because it is linked to fossil fuel industries, we have a real challenge, and we will basically preclude huge pools of international institutional capital, as well as a lot of domestic institutional capital, which naturally should flow to these issues as well. I've taken a lot of time, and I'll climb down off my soapbox now and maybe hand over to Mark, but I just wanted to set the scene about financing in general before we double click into methane.
Thank you for that, Catherine. Mark, maybe you could just jump in. I also do have a lot of questions about what you said, Catherine, for Mr. De Somma. Vis-a-vis the FDB, we've seen a lot of initiatives that actually are spearheaded by the African Development Bank. So part of what Catherine said actually sizzles into many of the initiatives of the African Development Bank. So, Mark, could you just jump in to just share some context and maybe broaden a few of the things that Catherine was saying? De Somma, we'll come into you just after that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the great opportunity to be here. And Africa Catalyst, thank you for convening this. And by the way, congratulations on an excellent report. I've had the privy to see a version of it before it goes out. I'm going to reiterate or emphasize many of the things that Catherine just said, but let me just start just slightly more sciencey and just quickly touch on methane. I say methane, you may say methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. I think you probably all know it's between 30 and 82 times more potent than CO2. It's a very significant forcing agent for the climate crisis. And unless we solve methane, we will not deliver Paris. It is as simple as that. But and if we think about globally or even in Africa, there's a big opportunity to reduce methane in agriculture, in energy and waste. And many, not all, but many of these areas can be solved today with proven technology, and many of them are intrinsically attractive. Many of them make money. If I speak in the oil and gas area, the IEA has repeatedly said, and so have we, that many methane reduction opportunities in oil and gas intrinsically are attractive. But there are abundant opportunities, to Catherine's point, that are on the table to be grabbed that are not being taken. And I think there's a number of reasons for this. One, and I'm sorry to be a bit sort of sciencey and geeky, but actually one is around data. Lack of data and lack of transparency today, or until today, has meant that people have not been able to really understand the scale of the opportunity. Some have even been somewhat denying the opportunity. And that's really been a hinder to people taking action. But actually, now that we have more and more data, there are satellites that track methane. You can track it from drones. You can track it in the field. Similarly with flaring, etc. Now we have this data. We can see where the opportunities are. And to Catherine's point, there are so many attractive opportunities that could be realized. But there are a few problems. And just in my own words, to reiterate what Catherine said, and because I speak to investors all the time, and they tell me these three simple things. They say, number one, it's not OECD, it's too risky. The cost of capital is 20-30% more. We need to de-risk. They say, number two, it's fossils. We don't want to invest in fossils. And they say, number three, whilst there are loads of opportunities, they're not ready enough to actually invest in right now. And I would also agree with that. There is a large pipeline, but to mature that pipeline to an investment-ready state takes time and takes money. And actually, it's one of the recommendations in your report, Africa Catalyst, that we spend not only more money, but we also spend more money on project development. So actually to mature these opportunities. So, there's such a big opportunity. And I would even argue that companies and countries should be acting in their own self-interest. We are in the middle of a climate crisis. We're also in the middle of a cost of living crisis and an energy security crisis. So it's beautiful, if that's not the wrong word, that capturing methane is capturing a valuable commodity which can be monetized. And by doing so, you can improve energy security, you can create jobs, you can create revenues, and you can decarbonize. And with that additional revenue, by the way, you can, of course, decarbonize, but make your country more attractive. You can attract more investment, and you can accelerate your energy transition. So there's a lot to be going here for. And if you don't do it in your own self-interest, the EU methane regulation, and I'm speaking here about energy imports, oil and gas, came out last week. And by 2030, if countries that have high emissions intensity energy are not able to prove they've got low methane intensity, the EU will impose a penalty, a border tax on that. Now, this is a perfect opportunity. Why pay the EU a border tax? Why not invest that same money at home and generate all the benefits? But of course, this is also where it comes to financing. And there I'll close in a second. There is lots of action on climate financing. Others on the call have by far more expertise than I, but I'm really looking forward to deepening and broadening the financing mechanisms to get more clarity on Article 6, especially 6.2 and 6.4, to think about transition bonds to find the right frame of reference so that we don't see solving methane in oil and gas, for example, but more generally as investing in fossils, but we see it as a decarbonization opportunity, agnostic of which industry it happens to be. So I'm really excited by the leadership that we're beginning to see. I think it's brilliant to see countries like Nigeria. I would call you out for a couple of reasons. You've got this flare gas commercialization program that's really motoring. You're also the first country to have really detailed methane regs. And the Nairobi Convention, also a great example of leadership. I think there's so much energy, so much passion. If we can mobilize and use the COP28 amongst many other sort of forums to focus the action and really get going, I think we have a massive opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I just, as promised before, I mean, Mark, you've also touched on a bunch of things. I'll definitely be coming back to you. Dosoma, I want to bring you in. I went through a report from the African Development Bank from 2022 that actually highlighted the opportunities on the continent with methane. Again, Mark, methane, soccer, football, shovel, spade. Yeah, it depends who you ask. So what is the African Development Bank actually doing in this particular space to make sure that methane is adopted, let alone financed on the continent? Because adoption, for all intents and purposes, is almost impossible without financing.
Yes, thank you very much,
Arnold, let me first extend my gratitude to you and AfriCatalyst for inviting us to this very important dialogue before we go to COP 2018 in Dubai in a few days. Before I answer your question, you all know the background. You know, Africa is contributing less than 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, including methane as one of the greenhouse gases. And the continent emits annually about 4% of those gases. But we all know that methane emissions in Africa, although they are low, it is rising with the continent currently contributing a third of global methane emissions. This has also been recognized by the sixth assessment report of the IPCC that says that methane is a major determinant of current and near-term global temperature increases. So we need to really prioritize methane emission reductions in the way to limiting global warming. That said, the African Development Bank, in response to the challenges posed by climate change in Africa, is currently implementing a very ambitious climate action agenda, which focuses on supporting a climate resilient and low carbon development in Africa. And with a strong emphasis on adaptation, of course, because this is Africa's priority, but also on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. We also consider ourselves as at the forefront when it comes to advocating and financing Africa's climate solutions. And for that, you may know that we set for ourselves a very ambitious target of allocating 40% of our annual investments as climate finance. That was set in 2016, and we have been able to achieve that target for the first time in 2021, when we have allocated 41% of our annual resources as climate finance, and last year we even achieved 45%. We have committed also to be fully aligned to Paris Agreement goals by the end of 2025, and we have been putting in place several mechanisms to ensure that our investment in Africa are based on climate-informed considerations, and that they do not contribute much to greenhouse gas emissions. And we are currently applying a set of tools, including a greenhouse gas accounting tool, to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions or emission reduction from our investment project by project. Since the adoption of the Global Methane Pledge at COP26 in Glasgow, we have increased our engagement in this area. Let me just give you a few recent updates. In 2021, we commissioned a report. I think somebody has already mentioned that report, to quantify methane emissions by sector and by country in Africa, and to show the progress towards meeting the global methane pledge. And the report concluded that Africa currently, methane emissions in Africa currently amounted to about 4.7 million tons of methane. And there are some particular sectors that are very critical here as far as Africa is concerned, starting with oil and gas, which is the highest emitting sector with 48%, followed by municipal solid waste, 35%, wastewater, 16%, and coal, 1%. And based on that report, currently we are looking into an internal assessment to review methane emission footprints from our own investments in order to identify where the bank could make significant reductions, and where major mitigation options could be addressed. So this internal study is being currently developed as part of our efforts to be fully Paris aligned by 2025. And for us, this could be an important contribution to financing methane abatement in relevant sectors of our investments. And as we are a financing institution. As already mentioned, we are championing several financing solutions to address climate change. And one of those solutions, financing instrument that we are championing is our multi-donor trust fund, which is the Africa Climate Change Fund, ACCF. This fund has been able to mobilize financing from some of our partners, including USAID, from the USA. And with the financing that we have been able to mobilize, we are currently preparing to launch at the beginning of next year, call for project proposals focusing on 4 key methane emitting sectors. These are agriculture, livestock, waste, and energy. I think this corresponds to what Mark has also mentioned right just now. So we are aiming to see projects entering our pipeline from these call for proposals. And these pilot projects could also be further scaled up by the regular investment from the African Development Bank. Let me also mention that in addition to this, we have been deploying a range of other initiatives that are also helping to improve the volume and reliability of financing in Africa. Let me mention the newest one, which is the Climate Action Window, a new instrument that we adopted in December last year as an innovative tool to scale up financing, climate financing in the poorest and climate vulnerable countries in Africa. And there are 37 of those. So this new instrument is aiming at mobilizing between 4 to 13 billion US dollars. So far, only last year, we have been able to mobilize a seed capital of about 429 million US dollars. And these resources are going to be used to finance both adaptation and mitigation actions. And when I say mitigation actions, these also include methane. So this new instrument is going to be really a game changer in financing climate action in Africa, including methane abatement finance. So for the sake of time, let me stop here, but I can come back later to provide more insights on what we are doing on financing climate actions, including methane in Africa. But in conclusion, I might say that there is no dedicated financing tool yet for methane abatements. We are using existing instruments. So moving forward, I believe that we may be able to think about how we can really have a much more important tool dedicated to that big agenda. And this discussion, I hope, will trigger actions from institutions like us and others in order to really strengthen our engagement in methane abatement globally and particularly in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Abdul, let me bring you into the conversation. It's very fascinating. Just going through your bio, you do have a master's degree in international risk management. Catherine did mention risk earlier on. Well, clearly the gloves are off right now, so I guess it starts with you. Catherine mentioned, well, also Mark, the whole issue of risk. The risk issue puts such a massive premium on many of these investment projects on the continent, which in the end makes them not even worth the investment. So you understand the continent, you've worked for the World Bank, you've been on both sides of the aisle. What needs to be done to make sure many of these methane projects are actually investable? I know it's very broad of a question, but maybe you could wear your academic hat and on the other side, also tap into the other sides that you've worked with the funder, for starters, for all intents and purposes.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Arnold. And I hope that you can hear me clearly. So, no, thank you very much. It's good to have the opportunity to be talking about this important topic. Actually, being the last to speak, I think it's makes my job also a bit difficult or easy. I can say I agree with everything that have been said or come with some other perspective. But you mentioned the importance of risk. Before I reach the risk issue, to get back again on some of the contexts, and this is something I've been talking to all the parties across the board, but also within the bank and talking to other partners. And it has been mentioned somehow, we have 600 million Africans who do not have access to electricity. This represents 43% of the global population. So there is an important, huge need to foster the investment in the energy sector. We have a recent report talking about one specific country like DRC. That report says that if we keep the trend of electrification of a country like DRC, we take the last 10 years and we project it from 2020 to 2030, by 2030, 80% of the population of DRC will not have access to electricity, which will be about 80 million persons, please. So this is a level of 600 million people is about twice the population of the country like the United States, or 1.5 times the population of the EU, to bring some element of magnitude. So there is a huge need for that. And we cannot have everything we've been talking about, inclusive, sustainable development, economic transformation, industry, even jobs, without having addressed the energy issue and the electricity issue. So the link with methane is critical and is fundamental. But still, and it has been also said earlier, Africa represents 3% of the gas emission, the GHG. So this is also another element we need to factor. But it's a region that is most affected, obviously, in terms of magnitude by the climate change, in terms of issue access to resources to address the climate agenda. So this is a context. Then where we are within the World Bank. As you know, we have a new World Bank president since June. And we have embarked also on a series of reforms which have been presented in Marrakesh during the annual meetings. Within these reforms, what we have highlighted is a couple of things. One is what we call the global priority programs. And within the global priority programs, you have the issue of climate, two dimensions, adaptation, mitigation. But you have also the issue of energy. And to link the issue of energy with our current discussion, the African ministers, when they met with the president of the World Bank, they asked to have a World Bank group, which means all the entities of the institution, the public and the private, to come with a strategy for energy in Africa, which will include not only the renewable, but also gas and any other opportunities to have input to increase this access. Then the role of the private sector, or the importance of risk and de-risking. Two dimensions. To give one context again, you mentioned academics, so I will give you some statistics. Recently, in an African Development Bank discussion, I think Adesina highlighted the point with some African head of state, exactly like Catherine mentioned, perception and reality. And from that, those reports that came out from the AFDB, actually, Africa has the lowest default rates when it comes to infrastructure financing in the world. Africa's default rate is 5.5%. If you compare it to other regions, Latin America, it's almost 2 times, 3 times, 13%. If you take Asia, it's 9%. Western Europe is 6%. So actually, even if you look at the hard figures, Africa is the least risky region to do investment in the infrastructure, including, of course, in the energy. So we need to work as well, of course, to not only to, I would say, to change the narrative, but also to come with any instrument we can use to do some what we call de-risking, concessional financing, blended financing, any kind of mechanism going forward. But also, we need also to work, and that's what we have been doing as executive director and working with the bank side, engaging with our countries, what kind of reforms you can need to put in place, what kind of policy environment you need to put in place to make sure that you have the instrument to attract also private capital, how you mobilize the digital, the technology, for instance. And to give one example, IFC, the private sector component of the World Bank, they have a program called the Scaling Solar. Scaling Solar is a program that helps country put all the regulatory environments on one hand, but also help the country to do clear, good, competitive, international competitive bidding to bring independent power producers in the country. And then the kilowatt hour rate, the price by kilowatt hour, goes as low as possible. And we have some countries where even the price of kilowatt hour was about 2 cents, 3 cents, which is excellent in terms of pricing and output. But behind that, of course, you come with de-risking instruments. And to come with de-risking instruments, once again, I will say 2 things. First, within the bank, we have been discussing on how to bring, in the reform of the World Bank, to have one-stop shop for all that will gather all the guarantee instruments. Therefore, for any investor, we know that which is a phone number, I will say, like Kissinger said once, what is a phone number to address the guarantee issues? Should it be on the energy or whatever sector? So this is in the making. Hopefully we'll get that front quite soon. But second is also, we are discussing currently, and next month, after the COP, we'll have a platform of engagement for the partners on a financing instrument that we call IDA, which is a financing mechanism for, I would say, the least developed countries, which is replenished every 3 years. So within this discussion with the partners, all the parties, we say, we need to increase the volume of that financing mechanism, but also to come with longer term financing that will help as well do what we call exactly the de-risking, the concessionality of those instruments going forward. And to say that since July 2023, actually, the bank is 100% Paris aligned. So all the operation will be in line with the Paris Agreement. And if you remember what they say on the Paris Agreement, and I will stop here, Paris Agreement says we cannot achieve the Paris Agreement if we cannot reduce methane emission by 40 or 45% by 2030. So this will be also in a discussion, in the analytics, and in the negotiation on any reform that will happen going forward. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Abdul. And now that we've gotten to know each other, maybe now we could just have a quick fire, just for intents of for just time purposes, so that we get as much as we can out of each other. I'm going to start with you, Mark. What could the World Bank do to achieve this in the fastest time possible? What are they not doing, basically?
Such a great question, and I think there's some really good answers as well. And I've been party to speak with several areas within the World Bank, and I'm delighted to say that they're leading in this in a very good way. I think one of the simplest things we can do is to accelerate the maturation of opportunity to investment-ready, sign on the dotted line projects. And there's 2 things that we need to do here. The first is certainly where the World Bank can help, which is we need to finance the project development work. So the work that takes an idea, an opportunity, to something that somebody can invest in requires investment to technically and commercially mature that project. So it's project development activity. And this is something that's often being missed. The reason it's been being missed is because some of the incumbents don't fully recognize the opportunity. And even if they did, it's not necessarily their core area of expertise. So if we can find some way of unlocking this middle ground so we can get more shovel-ready projects to the table, we can really make a difference. And I think this is where the World Bank is working extremely hard, and I think there's some announcements coming out soon That's the first. The second, sort of linked to this, is a much more soft element. It's about leadership and it's about ambition, rather converting a lofty ambition into real action. And unfortunately, that requires real dedication, real on-the-ground leadership, and real engagement. And it's about turning what may be perceived as a threat, that we are not seen to be solving the waste problem, into an opportunity. And if we change the mindset, threat equals opportunity, then I think we can make real progress. And I think the World Bank, and by the way, the African Development Bank and the EBRD, many MDBs are really making real progress here, but there's more to do.
Like I said, this is going to be quick fire. I'm giving you maybe less than 30 seconds to just respond to this. Wouldn't it need to be, you see what's happening at the Africa Development Bank. There's Penomi Adesina has been around for quite a minute, but between Malpass, Kim, now Banje, you do have kind of a change of guard, which kind of might dictate. Abdul, I'm sorry, you're staring at me already. You're just like, this guy is going in for me. You do have a change of guard that kind of happens, and with that, maybe a change of narrative. Don't you, am I safe in assuming that then changes the priorities for the bank? Just give me 30 seconds on that, then we move on to the next person. You just mentioned something interesting, and I kind of had to retort.
Yes, I think so. You mentioned, and Mark insisted on that as well, leadership. I think this is what is critical at this juncture. I think leadership in the countries, how the leadership articulate the energy vision, objective strategies, and then how they engage as well with any partner. Should it be the MDBs? So we're talking about the World Bank and the African Development Bank here. I think there is a huge opportunity here with to have Ajay Banga, who also is known to be also very versed on the climate agenda, bringing his expertise on the private sector and his keen interest on the technology to play a distributive role in private capital mobilization going forward. So, and we have seen his first trip was even to go to Cote d'Ivoire, even before he started his duties, and he has a very good meeting with Adesina actually, and some also Mark said, so there are a lot of things in the making, and we are also looking at opportunities to leverage the mutual comparative advantage of those institutions. And I believe that this question, the request made by the African minister to Ajay Banga for the World Bank to work on a strategy for energy in Africa can and should be also one entry points to leverage this partnership, knowing that Adesina, among the 5 highs, also himself, he was saying that electrify Africa is one of his 5 key priorities. So I think there is good opportunity to foster, muster this partnership. And I will stop staring at you.
No, initially I had paused the question to Mark to respond in like 15 seconds vis-a-vis the World Bank and what they could do. But thank you for that response. It's a good response. It creates a lot of context. Again, we are proud to announce that the interpretation is back on. Again, sorry for the inconvenience. But Catherine, back to you. If you mentioned another elephant in the room. This is something we've heard for over 20 years. The risk factor. Away from risk, you mentioned the rating agencies. That had me very, very fascinated, because there's one country that I knew, which is Tanzania, that had refused to jump into the rating agency game until they needed a Eurobond, and then they were pushed to the rating agencies because, for all intents and purposes, you cannot get one without the rating agency signing off. And how do we deal with risk without rating agencies and, again, the narrative coming from outside the continent? Because ratings are basically a narrative that is not premised where you're staying, for all intents and purposes, for someone on the continent.
Yeah, what a brilliant question. And I do want to acknowledge Mark's point about this being an opportunity. So I think we can turn this risk conversation into an opportunity as well. And we have to, because there are real financing needs here. So we have to think about it from an opportunity lens and scale what's working from the AFDB to the World Bank to the EBRD and others. And we also, I think it was Abdul, you mentioned those wonderful stats around default rates and how African infrastructure default rates are lower than anywhere else in the world. Abdul, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a Moody's data set. So a Moody's data set, which is a rating agency, knows that we are looking at lower default rates and still does two things. Firstly, it still assesses the risk of lending to African sovereigns in what would be argued to be a more biased way. And secondly, is quicker to downgrade during a crisis like the COVID pandemic. And I think that matters because, again, I mentioned at the top, we are in an interest rate environment, which is incredibly high. Sometimes we are looking at indebtedness as a financial or economic instability issue, and actually it's a liquidity issue. It's about being able to repay rather than having the underlying fundamentals being risky. And so your point, Arnold, I am a very vocal conversationalist, at least on this ratings agency issue, which is that we see biases coming through in all different ways. The easiest response would be to say, the African Union should launch its own credit ratings agency, throw the baby out with the bathwater, sorry, Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch. And I'm not sure if we've got any ratings agencies people on the line, so we'd be very happy to engage with them. But the fastest thing to do is say, we just need a new one. Unfortunately, that tends to not work because the capital that we are talking about mobilizing, both domestic and international, still gets incredible comfort from the ratings agency's evaluation. And so it is actually, to Mark's point and to Abdul's point about leadership, it's about Ajay engaging with institutions who maybe he doesn't engage with every day. If you had a closer dialogue between the MDBs and the regional DFIs, the DBSAs of the world, the Rwandan Development Banks of the world, the Nigerian Infra Credits of the world, if there was a closer relationship between the ratings agencies and the MDBs so that they understood the fundamentals of the projects, so that they understood the potential political risk, but also opportunities, and so that they could have a closer dialogue around the clear signals from so many countries that the transition is a priority, but it is also part of a growth and development agenda, I think we would see a very different dialogue. Arnold, you asked for 30 seconds, so that's my quick 30 seconds. I could go on about this, but it's a great question.
No. What you're saying is extremely fascinating. Again, I'm just giving you maybe 30 seconds to respond to this. Then I'm going to bring in Dosoma to maybe have a little longer. Maybe the two of you could speak to this, right? So in March 2019, the African Union Ministers of Finance and Economy officially adopted the declaration that an institution was needed, like a credit rating institution on the continent. They developed a proposal, they developed the structures and all that. So this is not new to our ears, like having a credit rating agency that is, maybe understands the fundamentals of the continent. There's been other proposals to have something that's close to the new development bank, that is, of course, the BRICS, but a credit rating agency also on the side. So maybe in a 20 or 30 seconds, Catherine, you could just speak to that. How essential is the political will on that? Then I bring in Dosoma to just maybe just break this down for us further. Yes.
Well, Dosoma is going to have a much, I'm sure, more nuanced view, and I really look forward to that, Dosoma. So my 30 seconds is that the leadership is clear. I think Senegal's president has spoken as chair of the African Union, in his role as chair of the African Union, including to the UN, and very clearly pointed out the credit rating agencies as being a major barrier. Ghana's finance minister also says the same thing. It's really been not only a kind of classic COVID response, it's been a spiral, because as soon as you are downgrading countries, you actually increase the cost of borrowing even further. And I think we need to be incredibly thoughtful and alive to the unintended consequences of what these ratings agencies are doing as well. However, if we are expecting your classic mainstream banks, asset managers, and pension funds who sit in Canada, the big Canadian pension funds or the big Australian pension funds from my country, or the European investors, if we are expecting a mass transformation over to using an African credit rating agency, and if we're expecting that to change things tomorrow, next year, the most urgent time period, especially for methane, which is acting now, because Mark will tell us all that methane is one of the nearest term drivers of global heating. If that's the case, then I worry that we need two tracks. We need two-track action. So yes, we can have an African credit rating agency, and we should be working on that and leveraging the leadership of Senegal and Ghana and the African Union being part of the G20 now. But we cannot rely on that as the only solution. Otherwise, we're just going to be too late, because it takes a very long time to build credibility for these institutions, which would be my only worry. Speed and system change kind of have to happen in parallel. But Dosoma, you probably have a better view than I do.
Dosoma, any thoughts on that?
No, I think this is a big issue, and to bring us back to the issue relating to financing, I think especially financing for climate action, MDBs like the World Bank, the AFDB are already doing their part. Being, development institutions, you may remember that they were established to achieve development mandates, but they have tried to take on a lot of climate action agenda over the recent years, and this is being seen through their own financing, which is more and more, focusing on climate action. That's something very important. And I must also say that it's time now to change the narrative around climate action in general. It has been we have been seeing climate change as a challenge for several years, which is fine. But we now see that, climate change is also about opportunities. And there are opportunities in various sectors. And we need to make a strong business case for that. And we are doing that. But we still need to do more. For instance, we don't see, especially in Africa, private sector is not yet coming in strongly on the table. There are, maybe due to the reasons that have been already mentioned by Catherine, by Mark, the issue of risk, which is actually, I'm glad that we are using the word perceived risk. These are perceived risks. These are not real risk, as already mentioned by our president. And so the role of private sector, the role of the financial sector, there are opportunities there. How to unlock those opportunities in order to scale up climate finance. We have at the African Development Bank established recently what we call the African Financial Alliance on Climate Change. The objective was to put in the center the Africa's financial industry, and to get them play their role through various ways. First, start by greening their own, for portfolios, to also get them invest more, shift from investing in the brown field sectors to more green field investments. If we can do that already, we could do a lot. Secondly, how could the financial sector also contribute to the efforts of mobilizing financing? You know that Africa's financing needs for climate action are huge. According to our recent Africa Economic Outlook report for this year, Africa needs between 2.5 trillion to 2.8 trillion by 2030 to achieve the commitments that African countries made under the Paris Agreement. This comes in addition to the financing needed to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So how is this financing going to be mobilized if we only rely on the traditional sources of finance, including public funds, which have become very scarce, very insufficient and limited? So it's time for us really to bring in the other parts of the discussion, which is really private sector, financial sector, to play a role. And to finish on that, I think there are opportunities also to innovate. Climate change is also about innovations. We see a lot of innovations, but we need to bring them at a certain scale. How can we deploy more and more innovative sources of financing? Blended finance was mentioned. Green bonds. There is a huge opportunity for green bonds in Africa, for instance. But to date, Africa represents 0.4% of issuance of green bonds globally. Though we know that the opportunities are there, we are not yet tapping into those opportunities. And coming back to MDBs like us, we also need to rethink the way we invest. We need to look into our investment to see what are the opportunities that could contribute to scale up climate action, to scale up financing for methane abatement. So there are opportunities, but we haven't explored them yet. It's time for us to look at them. And in various sectors, for instance, agriculture, we see that sustainable agricultural practices are good for increasing productivity, enhancing adaptation, but also reducing methane emission, especially in the rice production sector. The same applies for livestock, energy, name them. So really, there is need for dedicated efforts in order for us to rethink the way we do business and to identify those areas, those sectors that are more critical, that are more relevant for us to achieve climate action at a scale and also in a speed that is needed to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dosoma. Thank you very much for that. I've been notified that we only have 20 minutes. It feels like just 2 seconds ago we just started. And I still have like 1,001 questions for all of you, which has me thinking if it's possible for us to just have maybe 1 minute answers, kindly asking. I know it's very hard because you're passing on all this information. I know it's very tough. But I'm begging you, because I really want to squeeze in as many questions as I can in this remaining 20 minutes. There's people online. There's someone here. So I won't make this about me, much as I have many questions. There's someone online who's asking, how can we leverage the carbon initiatives such as carbon credits to include financing for methane? That's from the audience. It's not even about me, so I guess they take priority. I don't know if you feel like raising your hand. Maybe Mark, you can take this one because you are next in line. Abdul, I have a question for you also later on. Maybe Mark, you can take this question from the audience, and then Mark, Abdul, I'll come to you after.
Yeah, so the question was, how do we leverage carbon mechanisms to accelerate focus on methane? I think there's a real need to scale up the applicability and accessibility of carbon markets to methane things. I think we need to figure out, and this goes back to Article 6.2 and 6.4, but we need to figure out how we do cross-border financing and how we make sure that we get the right kind of behaviors without the unintended consequences. But I'm actually optimistic that there will be the right kind of discussion at COP. Not everything is going to be solved, but we've got the right kinds of brains that will have the right kind of creative thinking. If I may make one other very quick comment, I think one of you mentioned the importance of innovative business models. I think there's an increase, that there are new ways of bringing new capital with innovative business models. And I would just shout out Algeria. They have a new hydrocarbon law, which gives new ways of bringing capital to market. So I think that's another thing we ought to be talking about as well.
Wow, that was really quick. That's real quick fire. It's like speed dating. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Abdul, I was coming to you. Actually, I'd saved that particular question Mark hinted on it. Maybe, Mark, you can come back after. And I was just thinking about, Dosoma mentioned green bonds. We've heard about Islamic financing. Surely it's about that time where we actually tap into all, through the kitchen sink. You tap into each and everything that you're offered, if offered. And Abdul, how do you see the group accepting all these avenues going forward on a continent? I mean, you're the one who gave us that stats. Last I checked, it was just over 500 million people. You just changed that number now. Well, you just updated me to 600 million. So we need everything that we can actually tap into. So how do we then bring them to the table to make sure the financing is not just realized one way, but 15-fold? Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Arnold. I think a very important question. 1 minute, difficult to answer that, but a couple of things we said earlier. I think leadership remains important. Reforms, consistency in the reform, not only at the national level, but also I will say at the regional level, and how we build also on the regional platform we have, the Africa Power Pools, for instance, how to invest more in the transmission, interconnectivity, how we put in place mechanisms for energy regional markets, building on those power pools, for instance. It can help leverage, mobilize additional resources. But two other things I would say, building on domestic resource mobilization as well, to bring also national resources into that game. And through the DRM, domestic resource mobilization, how also we use best and better, you mentioned innovative financing bonds, diaspora bonds, for instance, how we can use that those opportunities.
I know Zimbabwe was doing diaspora bonds, I think 3 years ago. Yeah, that's an interesting, yeah.
Yes, you have Zimbabwe, you have Ethiopia that had a good, strong diaspora bond. Recently, we have Nigeria, but you mentioned also Islamic financing, the Sukuk. Those are instruments I think that also can play an important role. Last point I will say, and it can be a link as well to our discussion on the credit rating agency, the Africa capital markets, the national or the regional capital markets. How we leverage them best or better, the GSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the BRVM in West Africa, or other capital markets, how we can find opportunities to put in place investment instruments or de-risking instruments through those platforms. So I think there are some opportunities, but we need really to package it in a different way or in a more innovative way. And once again, the leadership at the level of the MDBs is positive. Ajay, Adesina, others, they can help foster this discussion, help structure it at the economic level, but also having the African leadership thinking this through at the policy level to help put in place the right mechanism. The instruments are there. I think we need some packaging, some dusting, and sometime I would say political determination going forward.
Abdul, it looks like you had the last word. I'm going to hand our three panelists 1 minute each to just wrap up everything or their final thoughts. I know this should have been like maybe 3 hours. Sincerest apologies, but it feels like we were just starting and now we have to wrap up. So kindly allow me, Abdul. Yeah, sorry about that. Kindly allow me to hand the floor to the other three panelists to just give us their final remarks. I'm going to start with you, Catherine.
Well, maybe we're just getting started, but what a privilege to be part of the conversation. And I think well done, and thank you to AfriCatalyst for bringing the right people around the table and having experts and development banks and sort of real courageous leadership. It's been a privilege to be part of the discussion, and I think it can only continue. So thank you, Arnold, as well, for bringing us together like this. I would echo the focus that we have had on domestic capital mobilization just now. This tends to be a kind of conversation about how do we get the global north capital to fill gaps, and that's just always going to be beset by this perception of risk issue, and it's always going to mean that the rules, the products, and the terms are set in a different place as well. And I think that is, it speaks to the opportunity part of this in the most holistic sense. Climate action, transition, it's fundamentally not just an investment opportunity, but it's linked and underpins the development agenda. We started off talking about energy access. Let's never forget that when we talk about things like reducing gas flaring or green hydrogen or any of the sexy topics that we've got on the table. Let's always focus on doing, as Mark told us at the beginning, making sure that we are spending enough to develop the projects in a way which is systematic, scalable, and investable. But where that perception of risk exists, let's make sure that the project development connects to the de-risking instruments. And let's make sure that the de-risking instruments are not just de-risking international capital, but are offered in local currency, are provided in a way which actually crowds in that domestic capital from the significant and growing pools of pension funds. We've mentioned Nigeria a number of times today. If we are not talking about a growing pension pool of savings coming into opportunities like this, then we're actually missing a trick. So I've been very, very inspired. I think our approach to this can actually help with the leadership agenda that we've talked about a number of times today. And I think being really explicit about funding for pipeline development, connecting to de-risking to tackle that perception, which creates a higher cost of capital, and ensuring that those de-risking instruments also help mobilize domestic capital. That's a great agenda and a great outcome from this conversation, and hopefully we can do our best to help. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dosoma, very briefly, please.
Yes, briefly, just a couple of points. First, we have a challenge here. And somebody mentioned leadership, but I want to mention also thought leadership. Because, the recent reports that we have seen have provided us with some evidence on how we have to tackle the challenge of, reducing methane emissions. And we should continue to produce thought leadership, awareness raising, as mentioned by Dauda at the beginning. This is still very, very important. When I was looking at the report by the Climate Policy Initiative on, financing, methane abatement, and it is, it's when you look at it, only 2% of total climate finance flows went to methane abatement financing. and it was about 11 billion only. And the needs actually are huge. In that same report, the needs have been estimated at 110 billion per year. So this is the challenge we need to tackle moving forward. There are challenges, but yes, there are opportunities also. And I want to finish on that opportunity on carbon financing. How can we leverage that opportunity? Mark has mentioned Article 6. Great. And Article 6 is already being harnessed by some countries. And let me mention the example of Ghana. Ghana, for instance, has signed a bilateral agreement with Switzerland in 2020 to acquire internationally transferred mitigation outcomes under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And this is helpful for both Switzerland and Ghana. Those kind of arrangements are good. They are still very limited, and we need to move to a certain level. And this for instance, example in Ghana, through a project in the rice sector, is going to be a good case to mobilize resources for methane abatement in Africa. So opportunities are there, we mentioned them, but I wanted to insist on the opportunities related to the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is slow to pick up, but we need to continue to mention that so that countries can by themselves engage in those transactions and mobilize resources for their own climate action agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dosoma. Mark, you have the final word.
Well, thank you. What a great session. Thank you very much. You know, if I just think of 4 words to sort of recap, they would be the words that we've said a few times. Perceived risk needs to be managed and solved. Scaling up project maturation to investable things. Changing the frame to think not about threats but opportunities, and lastly, importance of leadership. And by the way, I really like the last point, thought leadership as well, changing minds, advocacy as well. Thank you.
Oh, that was brief. Thank you for that, Mark. I really want to thank all of you. Many thanks to our panelists. Please kindly allow me to bring in the AfriCatalyst CEO, Mr. Daouda Sembene, to just give us some final remarks. I'm going to thank you in just a few minutes, but let Mr. Daouda just give us a few final remarks before we depart.
Well, thank you very much, Arnold, and it was an extremely fascinating discussion. And actually, I was getting ready, preparing to share my key takeaways before just Mark just did it, right? Mark just gave us the 4 key takeaways that actually we can get from this discussion. First of all, it is about the need to develop bankable and shovel-ready methane project pipeline. I think this is critical. And second, it is about the need to manage risks and make sure that we eliminate risk perception biases. I think Catherine talked about the need for de-risking instrument, including in local currency, and also the need for engaging with credit rating agencies. That's critical to manage risk. A third key takeaway is how we can have that leadership, and as Dosoma said, tough leadership to really push forward this agenda, this critical agenda. Because as we said since the beginning, we cannot move toward the Paris Agreement without actually, ambitious and productive and impactful methane action. So this is critical. And last but not least, I think it was certainly understood that we needed to convert challenges and threats into opportunities, especially those related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So it was a fascinating discussion. I cannot thank enough the distinguished panelists and also the moderator and the audience. So now we're very much looking forward to following this discussion and making sure that we raise more awareness on this critical need for methane action in Africa and around the world. Thank you very much, Arnold, again, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you so much for that, Daouda. Please do not forget, everyone who's maybe joining us online, that there are more reports on climate financing, actually. And we need to keep up the momentum. There are more reports. You can visit www.africatalyst.com/publications to get your hands on some of these publications. Thank you so much for joining us. Please allow me to thank our very esteemed panelists, Dr. Alamadu Dosoma, who is with the Africa Development Bank, Mr. Abdul Salam Bello, who is with the World Bank, Ms. Catherine Stadulka, who is with System IQ, and Dr. Mark Jonathan Davies, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Cape Terrio. Thank you so very much for making time, lady and the gentlemen, and of course our guests who are joining us in the chat rooms and all that and participating. Really goes a long way. Time flew in just a jiffy. Maybe next time it needs to be 3 hours because it was just getting heated, and then I was notified we have 9 minutes to go. Tragic indeed. But thank you so much, and looking forward to the next conversation. Maybe this needs to be done every 3 months, given the urgency and the statistics that Abdul actually gave us. Thank you so much. Wishing you a lovely day, a lovely afternoon, lovely evening. I'm Arnold Sagawa. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, Arnold. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great moderation.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very much. Thank you. Great moderation, Arnold. And thank you to all. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Arnold. Bye.
you.